I would like to thank this fantastic panel because it is an exemplification of what I call the posthumanities are doing. And I think there's a couple of features of it that I would like to stress for the benefit of the conversation and to open up to the audience. I think we've seen here a new type of humanities thinking on at least 3 levels: thematically, methodologically, and conceptually. We have had different themes, different objects of study, trees, codes, of course movies. We are used to movies from media studies, but movies that actually construct a social imaginary, movies that defend the body. To think that the bodies would exist as the zombified, wounded, never dead of cinema, when our computing industry, media studies, digital humanities are gone into this mind upload, consciousness upload delirium, is in my terms, a value judgment, a lot of excitement about disembeddedness and disembodiedness, but cinema defends the body. That's paradoxical. Trees as cinema. As signifying systems. So we have here new objects of studies, new themes coming in that are not anthropocentric and not even anthropomorphic. The humanities do not have to study only men. The proper study of the humanities need not be men in the humanistic sense of the term, the white European male, or the anthropomorphic creatures. In fact, the humanities can study anything. And I think that the great quality of the scholarship that you heard makes this point. These were excellent papers on pretty funky topics, on pretty weird topics, so thematic. Methodologically, different ways of going about the nature-culture continuums, different ways of going about actually self and world, and warring the social constructivist. John's comment was very well taken. If we take the world at its face value, where is the critical cutting off point? What is the difference between the analytic and the normative dimension if you want to think with the world? What does it mean to think with the world, to become with the world? Very strong point made by Yvonne. Phenomenology, the phenomenological tradition is the closest ally with some sort of romantic philosophies of nature about how to think with the world. Just because social constructivism is no longer the central methodology, it doesn't mean that everything is chaos. And the rhizomes are weeds, but it doesn't mean that they have to be imprisoned in a sort of Western idea of a garden, which is discipline and punish. They can also be let to go rhizomic and actually take over the world. Most rhizomes are invisible anyway, and you can't control it. But conceptually also, what you saw at work is a form of interdisciplinarity that goes beyond what we know. I almost think it's transdisciplinary. And I don't know to what an extent you also notice the institutional framing of the speakers that we had. They all come from pretty strange institutes. Philosophy, art and design, posthuman institutes, English gone complete, gone Brobnixon, post-colonial. They're all coming from post-disciplinary locations. And the point that I want to make is the humanities are already showing how we are capable of renewing ourselves, how we can still have some sort of allegiance to the disciplines, but we have moved already well beyond. And this is the point that I would like to do, make in response also to John's very well taken concern. We are already doing modes of research that we are not adequately representing in the meta-discourse that we have about ourselves. We are already very rigorous critical post-humanities. We just don't dare to use that term, or we don't want to sort of upset the disciplines too much, but the reality is already there, and the panel gave you a very good example of it, so I think we should applaud them again.
Well, sit here. Sit here. Sit here. So, questions. I would I would suggest taking questions by groups of 3, which will encourage you to be short, I hope, and give the panel the opportunity to make synthetic answers. So, questions, comments. 1, 2. Do I have a third, or shall I just take 2 for the moment? Okay, so just those 2 for the moment. Gentleman here.
Yeah, just a comment upon on a thing which was said just 2 minutes ago about the idea that putting seeds into kind of a prison was an idea of discipline, or putting things into disciplines, something like this, that this was a Western idea in the sense of like not a good idea. Discipline, of course, and categorizing things. If you live in Asia, if you know Asian society, that's a very, it's not a Western thing, it's a global thing. It's not a specific thing. Okay, thanks, that's all.
Thank you. Gentleman at the back.
Thank you so much for your very intriguing discussions about post-human image in the changing world. I have a project of entitled the Transmedia and World Literature. Particularly the poetry is my major concern, but now I'm doing the digital humanities and transmedia, which is relevant to the topic of human image in a changing world. I just wonder, if you think about the concept of world, the world is worlding. At the same time, different concept of the world, but starting from Heidegger's being in time, or some maybe beyond that, maybe the Nietzschean ideas, also maybe Deleuzian, Rhizome. But nowadays, a lot of people in the whole world are thinking about the literature from the different perspective, starting from the trees and also wave, two different kinds of notions of tree and wave. Following after some Franco Moretti, who is talking about world literature in a different sense. So world literature previously the following of the genealogical understanding of human nature in terms of the rhizome. But I mean, underneath the rhizome, they'll be looking back to the Freudian unconscious. So our body is kind of constructed in terms of consciousness and unconscious. But after we delve into the unconscious level of our body, but actually the body has been written in the unconscious, but the other way around, like the unconscious has written the body, so all we do is kind of retrieving all the database from the unconscious, so in the body. So there are so many different kinds of movies representing this kind of notion without knowing what you're doing, but actually it's represented already in the human images of different kinds of images in the world and gardening, also maybe different forms of representation. So my question is, still, we have AI or big data, but how do we understand human image, which is not real image, but represented in a different virtual space, or maybe through the transmedia? Things become rapidly changing. So the words which comes out of my body is no more my own words, but it's kind of long history of the accumulated database. All I have to is kind of open the mouth. Sometimes you speak automatically. Sometimes you are speaking consciously. So I think the human image is quite different in multiple way of the representation. So my question is, how
Thank
do you...
I think you already asked it, no?
No, my last question. So how do we talk about language in this term, in the whole human images? So maybe you can elaborate something more about the language element.
There was a third request here, and then I'll give the panel the opportunity to respond. Gentleman here with the white shirt. Yes.
Thank you. I'd like some comments and questions at the same time about the post. We say about post-colonialism, post-humanism, and so. I guess the term post is something, it's like a quantitative term. It means it reflects the transition from somewhere to somewhere. And it's more close to the point where we are from, but not where we go. So I guess maybe sometimes we should think about the qualitative characteristic of this term, because when we use post, it means what about post? Post, and so, and post. Finally, it doesn't reflect the qualitative movement from somewhere to somewhere. And finally, I guess, after our reflections about post, we should produce absolutely new conception which reflect new content. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The questions weren't addressed to specific panel members, so I'll let you choose whether you wish to respond now, and if so, to what. If you're concise, we can have a second round of questions. So who'd like to react? Cam first?
I can try. Is this on? I may have misunderstood the question, but briefly, just to link questions about the Freudian unconscious to these concerns about, on the one hand, world literature, and on the other hand, problems of language more generally. I think there's a tendency in a lot of contemporary discussions of embodiment, and especially theories of affect, to make this link between the notion of a pre-conscious, not really unconscious, experience on the one hand, and a sense of entanglement on the other, insofar as the body is already engaged in and responsive to or conditioned by a broader set of environments before we get to representational thinking. That is sometimes, I think, mistakenly distinguished from cognition that takes place through language. And part of the point of my paper, in reference to Whitehead in particular, was to suggest that trees enter our experience at the same level as language does, and that language enters our experience not only at the level of intelligibility, but also at the level of affect and influence. Now, there's no way to move from that insight directly to an attempt to kind of bridge cultural or linguistic divides, precisely because those divides aren't operating at some common frame or some common level of the unconscious. I think that's where a Freudian model becomes problematic. Instead, we're forced to engage in a series of acts of translation, and that takes place through languages, but language is not therefore a medium by which we engage or encounter some sort of set of common references, concepts, materials, what have you, that are transcultural. World literature's potentials, therefore, cannot be anticipated in advance. They can only be enacted through a series of encounters, and those don't have to be literary. They can also take place through some of these ecological experiences I was describing.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Yes, I'm not sure whether I really understood the question, because I have a little problem hearing. But anyways, I want to add something about embodiment and what we can learn from it. So the theory of embodiment essentially says that we become what we are during the process, the contact with the world. And now we have this whole talk of the general AI, and the vision that comes with it is essentially very human. We want to replicate our minds and our ability to think. But I think this is a very mistaken perspective, because what we learn from embodiment is diverse embodiments lead to diverse worldviews, to diverse people, and to diverse things. So what we should take into account when we think of artificial intelligence, we need to expect that something different comes out, some different intelligence. We need to be open for intelligences that are not alike as ourselves, that are different and that also have maybe different motives, or they don't even have motives, is a different form of intelligence. So also from a phenomenologist point of view spoken, we need to be open to observe and to see where this goes, and not only have our image in mind that we want machines to become human-like, but expect diverse intelligences, which could be very interesting and could be dangerous, or it could be a wonderful miracle. We'll see.
Yeah, I'm going to pick up from this. I think that critical posthumanist discourse and discourse that challenges traditional notions of embodiment and mind and conscious and the subconscious and whatnot, it always generates a lot of anxiety because we like to think that, oh, I'm a person, I'm Christine, there's a subject here in a body doing things and using it as a tool. And I think what we're trying to do, and Cam was talking about this here in his reaction to the questions, is that we need to keep in mind that there's not a pre-conscious and a subconscious and a conscious. Like, when we do that, we categorize, we separate these things that are always entangled. And I think that was a running theme in our papers, is that we're always dealing with a multi-layered, dynamic process of entanglement. We only separate these things because we want to talk about them, we want to try to understand what they are, but they are not to be disentangled. They are never disentangled in our experience of existing. It's always processual, dynamic, constantly becoming. So we only talk about these categories because it helps us wrap our head around it. But this is not the reality we live in. I don't know, did you want to add something, Rosi?
Thank you, panel. There were at least 2 requests, 3 for the floor. Let me try to retrack. Yeah, you were the first to raise your hand. Yes, please.
Right. First of all, I'd just like to congratulate the conference itself for having all these very mind-provoking insights. On the other hand, I just have this feeling that when I got the invitation from the organizers, when I look at the theme of the conference, and I believe that there's the post-human concept of the human is implied in the theme, but and in fact, at the last day of the conference, the climax, the culmination of the conference, indeed, is presented in this excellent panel. But I just have this feeling that since this conference is taking place in Asia, and all these great East Asia, and all these great East Asian traditions, such as Taoism, Buddhism, Japanese Shintoism, and Korean shamanistic traditions, these seem not to have been thematized very well at this conference. So this is more a kind of a comment or suggestion to the organizers of this forum that maybe, as this conference is taking place in East Asia, maybe these should have been thematized a bit stronger or highlighted more stronger at this conference. Otherwise, we are seeing, with due respect to the speakers, we are seeing pretty much all Westerners talking about the post-human orientation or movements. But in fact, all these great East Asian traditions, thousands years ago, have already been talking about all these interesting concepts. And my own work is precisely doing a complementary kind of studies to bring these two traditions or two sides of traditions together. And so I really like to thank all the great speakers for providing us all these interest on the most recent developments in the conception of the human. But our organizers, please, maybe next time you should do some work to highlight the East Asian traditions, which have been sidelined for a long time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. There was a request for the floor here. You asked for the floor, no? That's okay. I'm doing my best to be fair to everyone.
All right. Okay, so the question is more on the word post. So what I find is that in the West, we had modernism, and then it was posted. And then we had feminism, and then again it was posted. And now we are posting humanity. So possibly you're trying to form a heterogeneous perspective, but I would like to ask, I mean, do we need to post humanity in order to be more human? I mean, can't we just be in humanity and do things that we are doing? So,
Thank you. Third?
I'll take the third.
Yes, please. I will try to have more questions if time permits, but
I'm not posing a question, but I'm airing a concern. I think what is being discussed at this conference, and particularly this moment, has relevance for a larger public. If I were a journalist and I have to report on the results or the outcome of this conference, I would be at a loss. First of all, because of the terminologies. You know, how do you communicate? Communicate with a larger audience. Because what you are discussing here is of utmost importance to the contemporary world. And we must find a way to communicate with a larger public.
thank you very much. Comments?
If I may, thank you so much, and can I say how much I enjoyed your paper? I thought it was a masterpiece of clarity as well. This allows me to fill in a point that was already raised very coherently by John on the methodology involved. And I share your concern, like, what is going on here? So let me for a moment go back to this. Now, I am not responsible for this. I did not write this. They did not write this, okay? I did not invent this. They did not invent this. We didn't make these up. This is happening in the world around us, okay? This is called enlarged distributed empiricism. This is the methodology of immanence. We are taking what is happening in the world. The methodology also comes from Foucault's analysis of discourse. You're looking at the productions of knowledges. These things are happening. Do I wish that they weren't? Maybe I do, but it doesn't matter. They are out there. So this is the form of empiricism that the humanities can bring to the world. We are looking at the production of knowledge, and you're thinking, what are these people doing? Like, who would have thought of inhuman humanities? Who made up resilient humanities, civic humanities, medical humanities? And of course, it's an empirical question to go out there and look at the composition, not only of the discourses, but also of the practices. And Oxford set up a new institute for transhumanism. It's called the Institute for the Future of Humanity. The German government spent 50 million on a project called the Anthropocene Humanities. So, you know, it's not as if I am in love with Post. I hate Post. But I did have to edit a posthuman glossary, and please take the flyer, it is out there, a huge posthuman glossary, precisely to introduce the concepts to the general public. We have the flyers at the entrance with a special price. It's 102 entries, 97 contributors trying to answer your questions. Now, when you look at the language that these mad people are using, you say, are they all on drugs? No. They are people who are trying to cope with the complexities of today. They are trying to reach out for what is happening. Are they betraying their disciplines? Look at these scholars. They are not. They are trying to bring the disciplines closer to the world and vice versa. Some institutions are helping them by constructing new institutes and departments. Others are pretending that it is not happening. Big efforts to communicate, big efforts to reach out. To be worthy of the world, and now I'm answering John's serious concern. I think it's a very rigorous concern. Are we making this up? How do we become part of the world? You try to reflect what is happening in the knowledge, you present it as clearly as possible, and you negotiate. Some of us may want to save more of the disciplines than others. I come from French philosophy, gender studies. I actually don't care if the classical disciplines take a bit of a beating. I wouldn't want them to disappear. I would want them reduced. Other people would want to say, no, English departments, French departments, we keep them, and within them, negotiate, but be part of the conversation. I think this is the message here. And empiricism in an enlarged sense of the term, enlightened, distributed empiricism, the specific empiricism of the humanities. That would be my answer. The panel.
To the last comment, or was it the last? I lost track. I think two things I would like to say. One thing about reaching out to a broader public. In my own experience of giving talks in public libraries, for example, or speaking on the radio, it resonates with the public. When you bring those ideas to the public, it resonates with their experiences. And we can have really great discussions about very contemporary pressing problems. And people are genuinely interested in these different modes of thinking because it resonates better with their experience. So I haven't had a problem communicating those ideas at all. I should say to my surprise, but I found great resonance there. And the other comment about can we just be human? Sure we can. I think that's what I was trying to say here, but I think we have inherited, in the West at least, a tradition that has superimposed on our experience an ideal of the human, a conception of the human that doesn't match the way we exist. And so it's a matter of rediscovering and recovering the human. And it means the post-human is not something beyond this creature that is a human, but it's a concept that goes beyond the concept we've inherited, and that has been incredibly damaging.
I just want to add, because I have the same experience when I travel with lecture series and I talk to the public, there's no problem in understanding. But what enhances our communication, I would say, is working with, say, artists, so that we create an environment where people can get into touch with people who work with technologies, be it in an artistic way or be it in robotics. So this moment of touching, of feeling, of resonating with something that is a different kind of experience than just our daily experience in which we have some things to do and some things to accomplish, but just play with technology, with new environments, and then talk with them, and then give new terminologies that resonate with their experience, then we get a great podium for discussing with everyone, so we don't have to stay in our disciplines anymore. That's not the point.
Just to briefly add to that question about public communication, I don't have a lot of great experiences communicating with the public in my own work. However, that may speak more to my ineloquence than anything else. But the text that I was describing in my paper, in several instances, are popular texts, popular literature. Haskell's book is popular nonfiction. What I was suggesting is that some of the concepts that are often seen as very exotic in Deleuze and Guattari are quite adequately captured by Haskell, even if he doesn't fully properly represent what he's doing all the time, I think. So the value of the humanities as a discipline for me in connection with that literature is the focus on questions of genre, on style, and figuration. And the insights that they bring to bear, I think, have a role to play in texts that aren't necessarily all that esoteric, including some of the popular ecological nonfiction that people are reading, which are really introducing conceptions of distributed and emergent consciousness, intelligibility, ecological causation, what have you, to a very broad audience. Wangari Maathai's work in Kenya on tree planting is also a way of distributing those ideas to the public, but not explicitly or exclusively through language. And so I think that's also a good insight.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, our time is up. My apologies to those who weren't able to intervene in the debate, but there is a coffee break and perhaps you can come up to the speakers and talk to them during the break. Rosie, any last word?
Thanks, John
before we
Crowley,
close?
for great chairing.
Thank you.